A few weeks ago, I noticed a post on Facebook. It said, "In the happy moments, praise God. In the difficult moments, seek God. In the quiet moments, worship God. And in every moment, thank God." So I decided I would use this as a basis for our ladies' Bible study group. Currently, we are using the one that says, "In the difficult moments, seek God." Reflecting on this, I was led to the story of Daniel and a verse in Daniel chapter 6. An edict had come from the king that no one could worship anyone except the king. This edict was written in stone, basically, and could not be repealed, even by the king himself. Daniel was a Jew who'd been exiled to Babylon, but because of his education and wisdom, he became an advisor to the king. And this was a plot to get rid of him. When he heard this edict, we read these words in verse 10 of chapter 6. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Using a term we know, this was business as usual for Daniel. This edict did not change a thing that he did. This was his custom, to pray and give thanks to God 3 times a day. This was his life and faith. This phrase, business as usual, is something that's been taken for granted for many years, but the phrase that we long to hear in these days of fear and turmoil. I can imagine a cheer will go up when the government says it's business as usual for Australia. We long for life to go back to normal. We crave security, and there is safety in sameness. But sameness can actually be harmful to us. Sometimes we need to be thrown out of the boat to remind us that we can swim and give us practice to do it. Daniel was on the hit list for extermination, yet he did not protest, abuse those who delivered the message, panic, or lose his cool. He prayed, giving thanks, just as he'd done before. He had confidence in his God. He did not sense this was a crisis. This was business as usual for God. And if you notice, his prayers were not pleadings or rantings, but praises. He gave thanks to God 3 times a day. The Apostle Paul in 1 Thessalonians 5:18 reminds us, "In everything give thanks." For us, this applies to now, or as the saying goes, if not now, then when? 3 times a day. So when most of us sit down to 3 meals a day, and some of us are in the habit of saying grace, let's also pause to thank God for his hand in this situation. Thank him that he's working through this to bring good for us, even though it may not look like it at the moment, and glory for him. Jeremiah 29:11 is a favourite verse of mine, and it says, "I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for good and not for harm, to give you a future full of hope." For God, this is not a crisis. You may know the story of the Israelites, finally freed from Egypt after years of slavery. But realising they had suddenly lost his entire workforce, Pharaoh changed his mind and sent the army after them. As this group of over 1 million people approached the Red Sea, the Egyptian army appeared behind them. So there they are, hemmed in, the sea in front of them and the Egyptian army behind them. So Moses cried out to God, and God did what God does. He opened a way through the Red Sea. They walked through on dry land, and when the army went to cross, the ground was no longer dry, and their chariots got bogged and they were all drowned in the sea. An amazing story of what happens when we look to God in faith for the answer. All through the Bible, God comes through in times of personal crisis when people trust him. I too have seen God come through in many times of personal crisis in amazing ways. Safe and comfortable does not inspire growth, but the birth of anything new comes through pain and discomfort. Let's stand back and see what God is birthing through this. And can I encourage you 3 times a day to thank God that he cares enough to shape us through this medium or whatever else you are going through. This is where God shines through. This is where God does his best work. This coronavirus is not a crisis for God. It's business as usual. Until next time, I pray God's blessing and peace on you and your family.